welcome to this episode of Beyond the Tech. I'm Rich Tolley. Alongside me is
Ian Perry
and Sumit Solomon.
And we're here today to talk about the impending PSTN switch off. So first things first, chaps, I think it's understanding what we're actually talking about today and why we're ultimately talking about it, which is essentially the fact that BT are going to be closing off all of those copper services which support the PSTN, ISDN in January of 2027.
Yeah.
So I think really it's, if people aren't thinking about it and planning about it right here and now, they definitely need to start doing so. Why is it being switched off? All those copper circuits are being retired. They've not been sold for a long, long time, but ultimately, we've all seen it at home. Those broadband providers replacing our old copper telephone lines with fibre circuits, and organisations are going to have to go that way as well as per sort of January 2027. So what does that mean for businesses though? I mean, what are you seeing out there in terms of organisations that are coming and wanting to move away from these services?
Yeah, it's something we've kind of have been threatened before. I think this is probably the second or third date that has been proposed for the switch off. Pretty certain it's actually happening this time. It's been kicked down the road a couple of times. So yeah, those services are going to be turned off. As you say, at home now, we've all got full fibre broadband. You don't get the old kind of copper line, the filter and the dial tone that you used to get. Modernising the PSTN infrastructure onto a digital and IP world, which fits well with the solutions that we've been selling our customers for many years. We used to have things to convert that old sort of circuit switch or analog service into our world of IP. Now everything's IP end to end. So yeah, much simpler technology-wise, but as we'll probably cover in this a little bit later, not an easy switch, right? Potentially not an easy switch. So a lot of things to think about.
Yeah. If I just add the technical layer to it, like what this PSTN switch off is in terms of in the technical terms, right? Obviously, it's basically digitization of those voice services and alarm services, which are currently dependent on the copper wire, which basically is the current passing through those wires, right? And what we're doing is just digitizing that element, which is no longer relevant with the modern systems today. And yes, probably the last piece of technology that is still dependent on those analog circuits, which is still running, those currents kind of, 0 is off, 1 is on. That's basically going to be in the digital world. I actually said it the other way around. It's basically current on and off is what analog is, and 0, 1 is what the digital is. So it's basically that's what's happening. And to be honest, it has been around for 20 odd years. The whole tech, is kind of probably the last ones to be replaced now. So yeah, it has to be done. And basically we just need to assess what's going to be impacted, in the business world, in the public sector, in the homes, critical services, and that's basically what we're going to be exploring here.
I mean, a lot of organisations have already moved to SIP in some degree in terms of a modern voice connectivity service. But I think, and I've been guilty of this in the past, back in my consultancy days, when moving people from legacy PBX platforms to, Skype for Business or Teams nowadays and Cisco WebEx in your world, Ian, you had conversations around fax devices and lift phones and those sorts of things. And you going through the design workshops, you're figuring out how are they interconnected, how are they, getting the calls in and out. And when the client responded, oh, it's a direct exchange line, you were like, whew, don't have to worry about that then. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where now we do. And all those services that we left behind, facilitated by these copper circuits, they need to be moved away. So just because your users are using SIP and they're on a modern cloud-based telephony platform or whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that you're going to escape unscathed when we turn this stuff off.
Yeah, it's all those hidden things, isn't it? As you say, the obvious front of office stuff, our phones, it's all IP powered, it's all great, but yeah, those things hidden away in the background, just quietly functioning off a direct exchange line. Yeah. The things you mentioned, the lifts, the fax machines, I think Sumit, you mentioned things about home alarm systems, telecare, that kind of thing. We need to do something with those now as well. So there are kind of interim steps you can do. You could analog digital devices, terminal adapters, etc. You could use. That's a bit of a temporary fix, really, because let's step back to what's the outcome we're looking for. We need this device to function. Right? We don't need that analog wire in the middle, and to enable the analog wire through some expensive digital solution, let's digitise the whole thing end to end. So yeah, opportunity just to look at the overall solution that we're providing, and modernise the whole thing in one go. And that'll be, I think catches people out is those little hidden things away that suddenly on the 1st of February next year don't work.
Yeah.
And some of those are critical, right? So a lot of things, someone mentioned it being sort of exchange power. So you've got power come down those wires. That's your DR solution, right? That exchange has super robust power supply, probably more than your enterprise might do. Yeah. Hospitals, use those red phones for years. A lot of people just know that will always work, and I can go and have a super cheap phone at the end of it. It's power from the exchange. We've got to move away from that. So even our approach to kind of resilience, disaster recovery, etc., that's got to change a little bit as well. We need a bit more robustness, perhaps, in some of those solutions.
And it's a good point, though, because when we are talking about those vulnerable use case scenarios with care homes and, like you say, with hospitals, any solution that does get proposed from a modernisation perspective as part of the PSTN switch off, it will need those resiliency conversations factoring in. So whether that be UPS or generator type conversations or what have you, dual power supplies on SBCs or analog gateways, whatever comes in to replace those services that are connected to the copper at the moment, they're definitely going to need to be considered. But I think it's a really important point as well, though, is don't just look at this as a service shut off. Look at it as a chance to sort of modernise those solutions as well.
Yeah.
Because when they're connected to a direct exchange line, for example, you've got zero control pretty much over what's actually going on in that space. No analytics, no reporting capability. If you integrate it with your wider voice platform, you're going to get all that visibility, greater control, greater management of it, understanding of whether the service is up or down or whatnot, or you can redirect it, you can do whatever you need. So I think that's another way to sort of take a look at this is, it's not just a problem, it's an opportunity to get greater visibility of what you've got in your estate.
Yeah, and those kind of things that particularly are only used when really bad things are happening, like an emergency phone, a lift phone, whatever, finding out it doesn't work when you need it is not the best approach, right? So as you say, if it's integrated into a wider platform, we can analyse it. We've got a platform that's going to know that endpoint is available. We've got perhaps network visibility. I mean, you mentioned redundant power, UPSs, that kind of thing. If we're doing it over IP, then our network is in scope for our resilience, right? So thankfully, we know a really good enterprise network vendor to be able to support with those kind of things. So it's wider than just replacing that wire with another type of wire, right? It's an approach to resilience across the whole thing.
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of know as well, what you have in your organization. I think the funny thing is that, these lines were installed about 20 odd years ago by a contractor, have been there for a long time, and they've moved on, and you have no documentation. So you've got no way of knowing what is in your environment, and that bill is getting paid by finance.
Hopefully.
So there's no impact as of yet, right? And then when it gets switched off, then you would say, oh, there's a critical service down. Or it may be that, there's nothing down really, so you don't need to take an action, right? I think that's the biggest challenge in my view. Everybody knows, hopefully, that there is a PSTN switch off coming, but what do we do about it, right? Which services? So I think that's probably the next thing if we discuss, how do organizations would know that what they need to kind of tackle before the switch off comes. And I think it's really tricky to get into the weeds of it, to find which lines are currently being used by critical business functions and which are probably not used at all. I did this engagement with an airport customer of ours, and they've got multiple analog lines, and I would say half of those were not even used. So they were just there. A phone is plugged in, and in some cases there was no phone at all. It's just a wire, in the wall, and but there's just no record of it, and so it's difficult to determine. But the bill was still getting paid. I think that would be the first starting point if I were running an organization.
100%. I mean, the invoice, the bill. Yeah. I think that's a good starting place as any. But like Ian joked about, you'd like to hope it's being paid.
Well, yeah, you've got some CFO that's looking through, well, what is this phone line we've paid for 10 years that's never made a call? Let's just cancel it. It turns out it's it's a really important emergency line somewhere.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, I think that there's options beyond that, and I suppose those are sort of areas we can also support clients in, whether that be getting a list of DDIs off of those bills and walking around the building with a mobile phone, ringing them to see what vibrates, what rings, what makes a noise, what flashes. I know it sounds very, very rudimentary and basic, but that is an option.
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach, isn't it? One, we'll look at audit your existing system, right? So whatever legacy PBX or even a modern IP system with some interconnect, we would look at that. We'd look at bills, and as you say, it sometimes comes to walking around. Found some bare wires in an airport that weren't being used, and you go around your phone number and you find out who answers it. So yeah, it's not just one thing you can do. It's a lot of things you've got to do, and understand the risk of missing some of those things as well is.
I had one a few years back, which was client was using an ISDN circuit on their secondary line, so they basically had 3 lines for redundancy. Primary was already on SIP, secondary and tertiary were on ISDN, and they didn't know where the secondary ISDN circuit was. They knew what building it was in, but they didn't know where it terminated, what wall port it went into, or anything like that. So, signal sender, got it sent to site. Jobs are good. And the chap there said, right, I think I've found out where this ISDN circuit is. And if you're listening, you'll know who you are. He phones me up. I've got it plugged in. I know where the signal is now, Rich. I know where the ISDN circuit is. I said, cool, I'm on my way. So I drove to site, and he was there waving the wand around the power conduit. And I was like, well, there's going to be electrical signals in there, isn't there? You know what I mean? Is it the same signal as what the signal sender's sending? And he was like, I don't know what you're on about. So I had a look at where he connected the crocodile clip to for the actual signal sender, and he connected to the rubber sheathing on the outside of the cable, which was never going to work. So essentially, connecting it to the copper is going to give you a better result. But I mean, even just things like that, if you know your PBX is still running ISDN, get a signal sender, connect it onto the copper wire at the back of the device, wave the wand around, and you'll soon find out where that cable terminates into the wall. And usually 9 times out of 10, you'll have a number or a reference number written on the little white box in the comms cab, and that'll give you a good starting place to go and figure that stuff out. But yeah, it's not an easy task, and you can see why some organisations maybe have not considered it, or it's not been a priority. It's easy to forget the stuff that just works, or stuff that you don't use. So yeah. In terms of replacing PSTN, though, I've already mentioned SIP, but as far as I'm concerned, you've got a lot of VoIP services now. You've got hosted platforms, multiple vendors providing those hosted platforms. You've got direct routing as a service from a Teams perspective. You've got Operator Connect. All these types of platforms can be used to host users. But again, when we're talking about that hidden technology, the hidden devices, what sort of devices would we look to implement on site in terms of replacing those types of functions?
Yeah. If we just break them down, one by one, let's say what services, are being, basically using PSTN technology underneath. So obviously there are 2 things. First of all, I want to kind of clear PSTN and ISDN in the voice side. So PSTN basically line is like a single line, that's BT line coming in that just serves one number. Only one phone can answer. ISDN is like, bunch them together into 30 channels, 2 for control, 30 for, your voice lines. So those are like basically your channels combined coming in as a trunk. And that's what we used to call the trunk. And that is effectively the same thing. Underneath, it's still running on copper. And so those services are going to be impacted in terms of voice. Then you also have lifts and alarms. Those can be tied to some critical systems like fire alarm, for example. That's probably the most obvious one, and both of those are tied to insurance, liabilities, etc. There are certain BS standards they need to adhere to. Then we also have some universities, they use alarm systems for their refrigerators, because I've seen those firsthand. So you've got like critical samples, in the refrigerators, and then if it drops the temperature, it just runs an alarm or makes a call, and probably hospitals as well. They've got similar systems, I'm assuming. And the list goes on. To be honest, that there are lots of systems that use this technology today. To your point, the hidden technologies we just look at the voice. Basically we just put an ATA and we would just convert the signal into digital and it would work. But then, the majority of the critical services are hidden. So some of the things I've just mentioned.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the ATA is one thing, analog term adapter. So we could take that device that used to connect to a analog phone line is now going to connect to our IP network. That's, I think I mentioned at the start of this, that's our kind of easy option, the easy out really, like this quick fix. Actually, most of those things, like most alarm providers and that, they realise that this is coming. So those things are now IP enabled as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as Sumit mentioned, we could put things like ATA, so an analog terminal adapter, which is going to enable us to take that legacy device that used to connect to analog phone lines into our IP network, which is kind of a sticking plaster really, because what we should be doing is stepping back and going, okay, this device we're connecting to, does it have a more contemporary connectivity option that we could use, like IP? And the answer is probably yes in most instances nowadays. So and this will depend on where a customer is in their timing just before the switch off. If we're mid-January, we probably need to rush and do something like an ATA, right? So get ahead of it, guys. Start looking now, and then you can start to plan all those kind of hidden systems we've spoken about, figure out if there's a better way of connecting those rather than just quickly chucking in a bunch of ATAs just to give us dial tone.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's relevant to mention as well that obviously BT are the ones dictating this timeline and saying that these services are going to be shut off, and they are. But I think it's worth mentioning that even if your contract is not with BT, you could potentially be affected because other vendors, other providers resold BT lines. So it's ultimately just one to be aware of, that just because you're not with BT doesn't mean you're safe. Yeah. But I mean, to Ian and Sumit's point, go and be inquisitive around the devices. Yes, your users, your hunt groups, your contact center might all be running on your new service, but what about your lift phones? What about the security gates? What about the fax devices? All those things you need to be assured, because the last thing you want is come the end of January be in contention with every other professional services organisation, including Cisilion, trying to get access to voice consultants and specialists when they're going to be absolutely inundated with projects to migrate away. So the sooner people start looking at it, the better in my eyes.
Yeah, there was just one very important service that I missed was the broadband, and some of the older broadband, as you know, they run off the same PSTN. Once that goes, your broadband goes as well because it's tied to your number. Now in the new world, the digital world, it's the other way around. So you get the internet line and then the voice comes as a voice over IP. But obviously in the PSTN world, you get the number first and then you run broadband over that PSTN line. So if you're still running that broadband over your plain old telephony service, it would go as well. So obviously there are solutions to that. The Sigia, fiber to premises, which is FTTP. So it's not just voice services; so it's also data services.
That's a good point. I mean, one of the selling points, I guess, in my time in the past into small, very small branch office or retail operations was that just get a broadband line, right? You get a phone and you get your internet connectivity for all of your data services, right? So there'll be a lot of that out there where it's nice and simple. It was relatively low cost. There'll be a lot of that. So it's a great point. It's another thing to think about.
And from a retail perspective, those point of sale machines, you bet your bottom dollar, a lot of those devices are probably running on some form of copper voice connectivity as well for the payment services, and that they definitely need to be looked at as well. I think ultimately the key takeaway from me is January 2027. It's going to be a significant time for anyone related in the voice world. It's going to get turned off. And if you don't know what your estate looks like, if you don't know what your voice platform looks like properly and in depth at a device level, things like we've already mentioned, there's going to be an impact to service. And primary function of a lot of those devices is in emergency scenarios, which is something that no organisation or person wants to find themselves on the wrong side of.
No, and it's not that far away. End of January.
No.
You know, that's just after Christmas, right? No one works over Christmas. There's probably, you know, and there's a kind of quiet period leading up to it. People don't want to plan projects in for then. So we're now recording this mid-July, so it's only a few months really before people need to, you know, start taking action on this, right? It's not a next year thing.
Yeah, can I be bold and just say that it's already too late, to be honest, and the customers who are already, you know, looking to do this, they're paying premium just to keep those services alive. So I'm talking about like 30 to 40% of premium on the existing PSTN lines, because they are being pushed to move away. Because I've already spoken to a few customers and that they're kind of in the boat where their bill has spiked so much because they're still on those PSTN services and not moved. So there's a commercial element to it as well. And to your point, Rich, you know, yeah, when you lose access to those payment machines, you know, you can't do business.
No, exactly. But then, obviously, Sumit, you and you, Ian, deal with it more closely than me. But those SIP circuits, the channels that you pay for in terms of an option to move away from these copper services, those prices are pretty damn competitive. You know, in terms of what they can offer from a replacement service perspective, you're probably going to end up saving money by moving to SIP or moving to a VoIP platform or a hosted voice solution. You're probably going to end up saving money in the long run, like you say, because they've bumped the prices up to stay on those services.
Yeah, it's economies of scale, isn't it, with consolidating. If I've got, you know, 20 individual lines I'm paying line rental for, and I put all those onto one IP connected SIP circuit, you know, per channel, that is going to be cheaper in almost all instances. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to save some money actually, as well as.
And another trouble is that, you know, because everybody would be scrambling to do it now, there will be like, you know, the race to get the right resource, the right company to do it for them. And all of a sudden, every engineer would be busy doing this. So you're going to be queuing if you're not taking action today. I would say, as I said, you know, if I can be bold, it's probably already too late, but you can still start and then, get ahead of yourself. So, yeah, it's not long.
And I'm not going to do the point to death, but even from a discovery standpoint and helping audit, you know, Cisilion, that's something we can help out with. We've obviously got consultants who can visit your sites and help you pull together an inventory of those devices and try and find out what's where and give you a bit of a picture. Even if you're unsure, you know, we can come and we can investigate and see what's actually going on and see what might potentially be still on an ISDN circuit or still plugged into a direct exchange line, whatever it is. Never mind actually help with the consultancy services and projects to actually move you away and onto a modern solution. So January 2027 is going to be here before we know it. And get modernised is basically the top and bottom of it as far as I'm concerned.
What kind of customers are most exposed to it? I'll probably just start with one. Is mainly the public sector, you know, our public services that run off. So let's just move away from phone services for a minute. What services basically are utilizing PSTN which are critical in our day-to-day lives? You know, and I would say I'll just start with like maybe a set of traffic lights. You know, you cross that every day. It's running on the same infrastructure. It's copper lines underneath. You know, and basically, you know, there's a control signal that goes. Runs on those lines and goes into control room and turns the line on or off, you know, and then those kind of telemetries, we don't think about it, but then those are exposed, you know, that kind of infrastructure. And then also elderly care, you know, telecare services, which is obviously is probably the one of the most critical ones, because you can press a button and it sends a signal and alerts the emergency services, and then they come and attend. I think those are very niche cases, you know, probably the extreme ones I've told. And there's going to be like specialist service providers who would attend to those and replace those services, which probably we can't offer those services. But then, again, to my point, you know, those are the services which basically we interact with day to day and quite critical.
We can offer advisory services around those types of functions, though. I mean, SOS handsets on the sides of motorways.
Yeah,
you know, have they all been upgraded and modernised. These are all the things that need to be looked into. But I think we've gone through the doom and gloom enough, and we've talked about what's going to be affected, the challenges that organisations are going to face, and when it's essentially happening. I think let's have a chat about the actual migrations, what they look like, the services that we can use to host those legacy functions. And an easy one for me to mention is obviously Teams voice. We've obviously got Cisco WebEx in Ian's world, but those migrations are tried and tested. If you're not on a modern voice platform, now's the time really to look at it again, not just from a modernising perspective, but this end of service in 2027 is a massive driving point for it. But like I say, those migrations, they're tried and tested, very, very simple and straightforward to do. We've got the solutions in place to be able to cater for those interconnectivities. But ultimately for users, it's a case of porting. And again, it's an important point you make there, Sumit, a little bit earlier about the timelines and how busy engineers and consultants are going to be. Porting teams, the likes of Gamma or other providers, Gamma aren't a sponsor, but ultimately they're going to have lead times for number porting requests. When you put in a number port request anyway, what's the default timeline on it?
60 days.
60 days.
That's like standard. And when we're talking about just queues and queues, it could lead up to months. So again, to my point, it's already too late.
And that kind of leaves you tied to the same. If you can't afford the time to port to a new provider, then that kind of ties you to your current provider. They could probably port your service to one of their own services much quicker than that external port. So Sumit said it's time is really ticking on this. But in terms of solutions, we've talked about Teams, WebEx calling, and that all of those things. It's just a different approach to how we do telephony. Right? We're not putting wires into the customer's building anymore. In most instances, it's all cloud hosted. Right? People don't want to look after an infrastructure. The ways we put that PSTN, you still need. We're saying PSTN is being turned off. It's not the whole PSTN, right? You can still make phone calls, but it's just how that's delivered to an end user. So, the way you do that now isn't just on how many lines I have in my building. It's going to be capacity or number of users at different pricing models that go into my cloud phone system or my cloud contact center that then delivers those calls from my customers, the public, into my employees, my contact center agents, customer service, whoever it is that we're talking to. So whether it's going to be a SIP trunk, we could put a SIP trunk in a customer's data center if we want to. If that's their preference, they still need to look after stuff, then great, there's a solution for that. We can put SIP trunks straight into our cloud solution, and we can do user-based things like Teams direct routing and what some of the WebEx calling cloud connected offers are based on the number of users you have. So your billing is a little bit more predictable rather than being, okay, I think I need to make 30 concurrent phone calls. Actually, that's a hard thing. That's always the thing to kind of figure out the Erlang analysis that we used to do many, many years ago. Whereas now, if you can just say, I've got 1,000 users, sell me 1,000 users of phone things, right? That's as simple as it becomes now. So, the trying to guess that capacity is taken away from the customer, because that was often a challenge to get right.
Yeah, and there's other services as well. Fax replacements. You've now got eFax, which are usually provided by your telephony provider as well. So again, when we're talking about, bringing in those solutions into your overall voice platform, that's straight away an easy fix for any fax solutions, and it works well. I've implemented it for many organisations, but again, like I say, and without sounding like a broken record, those migrations for users, for contact centres, for hunt groups, for your handsets on desks, the user interactions, tried and tested. We've been there, we've done it. It's a very well-trodden path. Again, if that's something that organisations need support with, it's something that Cisilion can obviously help with. But
there's another type of kind of solution where we cannot replace endpoint side of analog, which is basically your terminal side, where your desk is. And I'm talking about a very specific use case here. So like hospitals, universities, the buildings that were built in 60s or 70s, and probably have got asbestos in them. So you cannot just pull those lines, and drill through and then replace those lines with like a a Cat6 cable, those terminals would need to stay there basically, because as you know, the cost of replacing asbestos and the whole remediation work is going to be more than the cost of the solution itself. But in those cases, what we can do is we can bring in high density analog gateways, right? And they would sit in your infrastructure, which would convert your analog signal into digital. So we're talking about what's happening inside your building. So you've got to look at it from two sides. One is that is outside of your building. That's obviously going away. One is that is inside your building that you can, ideally you should replace, but if you cannot replace, we can obviously bring in some specialist devices that would convert that signal, and then you can talk digital on the outside world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you made some points, Rich. This is a kind of tried and tested thing for us to do. This is kind of what we do. So people listening to this, we spoke about all the kind of hidden things that you're not going to find, disasters that will be lurking for you at the end of January next year. And for some of the people, like Sumit mentioned, public sector, right? One of the challenges there is that they have quite long procurement cycles, and they like to make the most of their investment for as long as they can. That they last bought a phone system 10 years ago, maybe. So the guy that did that probably doesn't work there anymore. So that's challenging. So that's where I guess our experience of this is what we do all day, every day. Right? Our teams are doing this all the time. So someone does it every 10 years, doesn't build up that level of experience. This is where Cisilion would come in and be able to help you. One, with the kind of the audit. We know what happened, how these things are done in the past. We know the kind of gotchas that we've seen before across the dozens or hundreds of installations that we've done. So that will help with the audit, the discovery phase, finding out where all these things are, and then when it comes to actually migrating it, again, it's what we do, right? So our guys have been doing this for years. We've got really strong processes and capabilities and tooling that enable us to take that migration from whatever it was previously to whatever contemporary solution from one of our vendors that we think is the most appropriate for our customers. The other point to make in that is that let's not just migrate what you've got, because what you put in 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was, may not be appropriate now, right? We used to have a hunt group with everybody in the business in that rang, well, we don't need that anymore, right? We need something different. So, yes, we could just take a migration from what you've got today and do some tooling and put it into Teams or WebEx or whatever it may be. But actually, that's just a great opportunity for us to sit down and go, okay, this is what we used to do. This is what you could do nowadays. Where do those things kind of cross over, and what do we think is the most valuable for you?
And whether that evaluation happens before the migration or not, it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. I think people who are in this situation probably need to move off as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So in my experience, in my thought process, it is lift and shift and then worry about sanitation of those DDIs, of those devices, once we've got everything onto a modern platform. That time can be then spent to validate the data, validate those devices, validate the DDIs, validate the usage, and say, we don't need these things anymore. That's cool, that's not a problem. We can turn those things off, we can disable them, we can reduce the commitments with new SIP provider, whatever it might be. So it's one of those ones where I don't think you need to get all the planning done first and foremost. Ideally, what you want to be doing is making sure you know what your voice estate looks like. You know what connectivity services you're using. If you're confident and convinced that you're not using anything copper, anything on the ISDN, anything on the PSTN, any direct exchange lines, any resold services, then happy days. But if you've got one shadow of a doubt, give us a shout at Sicilian. We'll come in, we'll have a chat with you, we'll help you discover and investigate and find out if you are. And if you are, we can help you move away from it as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Rich. I was actually going to say the same thing. Is just having that peace of mind that nothing critical is running on those lines is absolutely key. And then that's, if you don't know what are you doing, so just give us a shout. And there are methods that we use basically. So obviously discovery is a key piece of thing. Cabling is another piece. What's the right tech stack? Whether can you go fully digital, or do we need a converter like ATAs or analog devices in the mix, to make you work? And there are like alarm services, lift services. So those kind of things that we do. I think the most important thing is that probably what we can offer is just help identify whether are you really using these lines. So the first port should be, we need to get rid of all of that. And the only way to kind of get to that point is to do a discovery, find out what lines you're running and are they important to your business. Is anything critical running? I think that would be my starting point.
The OpenReach stats showed that there was 500,000 UK businesses that were going to be affected by the switch off in January 2027. I mean, that's a scary, scary number. They could be relatively small organisations, no offence, but they could be using direct exchange lines. They could have one or two. But again, even those organisations are going to need support to migrate away from those services. What options they've got, we've already spoken about some today. But ultimately, there are some real compelling price options. But essentially, if you want your business to keep running, you're going to need to do something. So yeah, that important date, end of January 2027, PSTN switch off.
It's a good point. And you mentioned OpenReach, which people may not already know as part of BT. People, I think the message has been previously BT are turning this off, right? But it's not just BT. Lots of other people are reselling those services that use the same wires in the ground from OpenReach. So even if it doesn't say BT in the corner of your bill every month, there's a good chance that your services are going to be affected as well. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah. So should we wrap it up today by just talking about some key takeaways, one from each of us? Sumit, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So I think from me, the key takeaway would be that just understand your business, understand basically what's going on, what kind of lines you have today. It's very easy to be scared of something which you do not understand. You probably do not have visibility today, as been managed by maybe the building management. But now it's going to be down to the IT stakeholders, the IT directors to kind of identify and find out, if our business is going to be impacted by this PSTN switch off. I think it's a very key responsibility to any IT leader. And the starting point would be to just go and assess, just do a discovery. If you don't know what you're doing, just bring a partner like Cisilion or anybody else for that matter, and just basically establish that are you going to be impacted, and just build like an inventory, of your devices, of your services, and then make a plan.
Yeah, for me, it's just let's not get hung up on replacing like for like, right? We used to have some wires going to a lift or going to a POS terminal on a till. It's look at the outcome. What are we trying to do? We can enable comms for those devices. So whether that's a device, a lift, or a person, or a contact center, right? Let's not just try and replicate what we had and somehow engineer a solution to make it over IP. We can do that, but really we should be looking at outcomes, and if there's a way of modernising the whole thing, and even the whole process end to end, and if that's something Cisilion can definitely help with, right up to the contact centre and how we're dealing with that. We could leap into a whole other topic around AI and things in contact centres, which we're not going to do today, but we're having a podcast about tech. We have to mention AI at least once, so there's mine.
It's a good point though, Ian, and I think just sticking with yours, that modernise, even just to get visibility of those devices in your voice setup, I think is worth it. Never mind the switch off, but actually getting visibility and analytics and data from those devices, whatever it might be, I think is a key selling point. For me, it's about being inquisitive. If you wholeheartedly cannot say that you are convinced that none of those services are running on an old copper circuit, that they're not running on ISDN, not running on direct exchange lines, whatever it might be, give Cisilion a call. We can help. So it's one of those ones. Don't just risk it. If you are not sure, give us a call. And that's the top and bottom of it. And that's going to be the end of the recording session. So just want to say thank you everyone for listening, and if you are impacted, like I say, January 2027, give Cisilion a call. We can help you out. Take care.